Right, well, hello everybody, and happy Pride, and what a well-timed event this recording is. It didn't go to penalties, so we got out of the England-Germany game before the panel started. This is a session called Pride in Economics. Two key words there, folks, pride and economics. Pride at least being partially co-opted by the LGBTQ plus communities, and economics referring to a subject we're all interested in. Those are the two themes of our evening. What we are going to do is hear from four people who are proud economists from varying parts of the ecosystem. We'll get their accounts of economics, their interest in it, career and life. I'm going to pose a question from the outset to which I don't really have an answer. Economists are always trying to think about connections between variables, correlations, causations. And I guess the question is there a connection between the chosen specialism of economics and an LGBT identity? What is the connection for those of our panel and for those of you watching? I can only talk from my own experience. My interest in economics developed at school, really, out of an interest in the news and current affairs. I went to university and did PPE, which is a great kind of baseline degree in thinking about social science. I've remained at the relatively superficial end of the subject ever since then. So I did go on and study it more than PPE. And I guess I would say my interest in economics emerged at about the same time that I was realizing I was gay. But that connection in no way applies anything other than that I was just becoming an adult and working out what I liked in life and learning about my sexual identity. I don't know whether personalities, I mean, they've got to be integrated in our choices of subjects, haven't they? But I don't quite know what the connection between my being gay and being an economist interested in economics is. I know that I actually wasn't very interested in sport at school, and news provided a very nice preoccupation. I was a sort of precocious interest in news at that time. There's one other way, before I go to our panel, in which I think my deeper personality connects to my economics, or my love of economics. And that is that I'm someone who likes to think in very simplistic terms. I'm a simplifier. So I see my job in journalism as stripping away complexity and trying to get to the nub of an issue. And I think a lot of economists are a bit like that. Economists have models that strip out the complexity to give you the essence. They are like the London Underground map, rather than the Ordnance Survey map of a geographical terrain. They're simple, they're insightful, they're simplistic, they're liable to mislead in the wrong purposes. But I find a lot of people have that way of looking, and a lot of, I think, good economists are quite good at stripping away complexity and getting down to the nub of it. And of course, a lot of other economists like to build up the complexity. Does that make me gay? I don't know. Does that connect to my sexuality? I don't know. But I do think these issues around personality, identity, and a whole number of issues and interest in economics are fascinating. So what we're going to do is hear from our panel one by one. We'll give them 5 minutes each. And we'll take some questions after. I think you've had instructions to put the questions into the Q&A box, if you could, rather than the chat box. So we will take that. Now, we're going to hear, first of all, from Byrne, Associate Professor at the University of Liverpool. Ian, why don't you talk us through your love of the subject and where you are, Ian.
Hi, everyone. So thanks for coming. Fortunately, we all were able to watch the game and then come. So for those of you that did show up, thank you. Yeah, so I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Liverpool. I graduated, so I've been doing economics for a long time now. Shockingly, it feels like I was just in high school studying my love of the subject and sort of figure out what I wanted to do, and now it's turned into a career. which has been quite fascinating and really rewarding. And so what I typically study is the economics of discrimination. So a lot of my work focuses on understanding the queer community and how do they interact with the economy as a whole. So it's a relatively small field. There's very few of us that do it, but it sort of integrates, as Evan was talking about, my identity with the discipline itself. And as much as Evan likes to sort of strip away a lot of the complexity, a lot of my work focuses on building up the complexity and understanding the LGBT community and the different identities in the community, and how does that impact the way that they experience the labor market, the way they experience education. And so I do have a lot of fun work sort of like talking about, what careers and what majors do gays and lesbians pick, and why is it different than the majors that heterosexual individuals pick. So the way that the identity shapes their preferences, the economic preferences, and how they actually manage that identity in the workforce. So a lot of it is trying to move away from a very binary understanding of the queer identity, of sort of a 0-1 variable, the way we kind of treat gender, and allowing sort of the full rainbow to come into effect. So sort of a lot of that work has kind of led me to this sort of diversity and inclusion work in the field of economics. So I'm one of the leaders of the European Committee for Queer Economists. And so we do a lot of work with mentoring PhD students and bringing them through sort of the early parts of their career and building them up and helping them. Because we know that in our discipline, it can be quite severe barriers if you are not the typical student. And so I think our committee, the Royal Economic Society, the American Economic Society have done wonderful work, I think, in the past couple of years, really focusing on how do we increase diversity in our discipline. And a lot of it is sort of thinking about what do we bring as, LGBT individuals to the discipline. And so a lot of, my work with the Committee for LGBT Economists in Europe focuses on sort of understanding, how do we improve sort of the discipline, and how do we sort of, make sure that we're serving a wide range of these identities, because everyone's sort of experiences are different. But what's really cool is that we do see that sort of the experiences that students have of being gay, like the increased bullying, the societal pressure, it really does kind of, I think, shape you, and it gives you a different perspective. And because you have that different perspective, you can be a different economist. You can potentially be more creative. You look at problems slightly differently. And so especially when you're studying labor economics and economics of discrimination, having experienced that discrimination, I think really helps you understand the complexity in the model. So rather than keeping it really simple, your identity and your experiences allow you to shape your research and the research in the discipline. And you get to see, I think what's really nice is your own experiences reflected in the literature in a way that, like, when my friends write papers on, same-sex couples, I can see sort of what they're talking about and relate it back to my own experiences. And I think that's something that has been quite fascinating to see, because when I started, there were maybe 5 or 6 famous queer economists in the United States. There was very few. And, when you looked at the textbooks, there was no discussion whatsoever, of LGBT individuals. And so that really inspired me to write about the community and bring it to the table, and make it an important part of the conversation. Even though I've definitely been told by some other famous economists, why don't you study minority groups that people are actually interested in? But that to me only made me more convinced that this was important, to convince these people that, the LGBT identity is important to study, and it is worthwhile to do it in the formal way that economics allows us to sort of think about everything that way.
Great stuff, Ian. I mean, Ian, tell me about the method you're using, because I don't know what the data sets are in which you can compare labour market outcomes for LGBT people from non-LGBT.
Yes.
Of course, getting people to be honest about these things is not always straightforward. What are you?
So what is a lot of survey data? So the UK has a series of longitudinal cohort studies where they'll take everyone born in a week in a specific year and track all of those people throughout their lives. So we have one in 1958, one in 1970, 1989, and 2000. And what they do is they ask sort of, as you're growing up, they'll ask about your sexual orientation, they'll ask about who you're dating. And so we have all these different ways of identifying LGBT individuals based on that. But yeah, we only see who's out. And I think that's something that as an economist, we have to assume some things in our models to make it more realistic. So we just have to assume that everyone is honest. And that, those who are saying that they're heterosexual are heterosexual, and that they're, everyone who says they're LGBT are LGBT. And so what we can do is sort of look at outcomes over the life cycle, comparing and contrasting these people. But again, sexual orientation is extremely diverse. And one of the things that's been really cool to see with some of these cohort things that we're just starting to get is how fluid sexual identity is, especially amongst women, and understanding how that identity changes as people age, and how does that interact with their labor market outcomes as they go from 18 to 25 to 30 to 40. So we kind of, can look at how do things evolve and how does your identity evolve. But again, it is very much, you have to tell the survey person that you are LGBT and self-identify. So potentially we have some selection, but there's a lot of cool work, I think, that's understanding what does coming out, like what is the economics of coming out.
Yeah, it might be better for the fact that you have to take people's own interpretations of their sexuality, because it may be that hidden gays has a different treatment to open gay, and so all these kinds of things might play in, and you'll be measuring one of them, but not maybe all of them. Yeah. Just very quickly, I mean, obviously, as a queer man, you have a perspective that is very useful in the area you're studying. Can you be objective in that area, though? I mean, because I can imagine a tabloid newspaper saying academics, writing about themselves. They're not. Who are we to believe what he says about queer studies, his queer studies, given that he's, part of it?
I think that's where we come at it as economists. Economists, our robustness checks are longer than the paper themselves. Very much you kind of go into it, and when you interrogate the data. So when you see a difference, you are asking, is it due to differences in observables? Is it due to some random unobservable that we don't know about? Is it due to some sort of policy difference? Is it due to some sort of parental difference? And you really torture the data until you can have no possible other explanation besides discrimination. So you don't go in assuming a difference is discrimination. You have to then prove that it can be nothing else. And I think that sort of interrogative process forces you to be objective. But I think it's more, I come at it as a storyteller. I want to know the story of the queer community. So if there's a difference, that's interesting. If there's not a difference, that's interesting. But it's understanding why is there a difference? Why isn't there a difference? So it's, for me, I think it's more, as an economist, the discussion is why, and why do the outcomes look like this? Not, and discrimination is certainly part of the answer, but I think that's where the policymakers and the advocacy people kind of take the research from there. But as an economist, and a researcher, for me, it's answering the question and telling the story of the queer community, and then letting people use that story for their own purposes and kind of,
All right. Well, look, people might well have questions about the drilling into some of the research and the findings, but let us move on, because if Ian is representing, if you like, academia on this panel, or one of our representatives of academia, we're going to go over to the private sector, and Andrew Leicester, who's an associate director at a consulting firm, economic consulting firm, Frontier Economics. So Andrew, if you want to unmute and give us your account.
Thanks very much, Evan. So I have about a 20-year career, I think, as a professional economist. Started my career straight out of university, joined the Institute for Fiscal Studies, where Evan also began his career. So it's a little bit of commonality there. Spent about 12 years there. So doing a lot of work on looking at sort of consumer behavior and understanding the impact of policies around indirect taxes and VAT and spending on consumer spending behavior, doing a lot of delving into consumer data. And then moved to my current job at Frontier Economics 8 years ago. I work in our public policy team, so that means that most of the clients that I work with are in UK government, and I help them to design and evaluate government policies and figure out what they should be doing and whether or not what government has been doing has been working or not, and using economics as a tool to analyze and understand that part of government policy. I do a lot of work particularly on innovation policy and productivity, and sort of working a lot with the Department for Business and an organisation called UK Research and Innovation, who fund a lot of the public sector's investment in innovation, trying to understand whether some of their big high-profile policy interventions have been effective at helping companies to become more productive and more innovative and perform better. And as an economist, the answer is it sort of depends, and we probably need to do a bit more research. But I did a lot of work in that area. So I've sort of worked a lot on sort of thinking about individuals, and I think one of my takes on economics is really ultimately it's about understanding people and their behavior and drivers of their behavior, and how that's affected by policy, or how that's affected by their community, or how that's affected by their family, or how that's affected by their workplace. And I think that's just, for me, is kind of why economics is really sort of interesting and fascinating. Ultimately, it comes down to sort of trying to understand people in all their many facets and in all their diversity. I think one of the things that I'm sort of most proud of actually in my career as an economist is not so much the economics work that I have done, although I'm happy to talk about any of that, and I'm proud of an awful lot of it. But actually what I've been able to do at Frontier is be part of a team that's helped to set up our LGBT inclusion network at Frontier. So we have a team called Frontier Spectrum. So for economists who spend a lot of time doing work on auction theory and working in the telecom sector, it's a very bad economics pun on both spectrum as the kind of diversity of people and the colors of the rainbow flag, but also sort of spectrum auctions and all these sort of things that economists spent a lot of time working on in the mid 2000s and raising a lot of tax revenue for the UK government at that time. So economists like a good or bad economics pun, I guess, and we are no different. But our Spectrum team really helps to promote LGBT plus inclusion at Frontier. So we set ourselves up about 3 years ago. Myself and a couple of colleagues co-founded the group, and my cat has just come in to join us. So we may be getting another panel member in a moment. And what we do is basically try and promote visibility of LGBT plus staff and issues at Frontier, but also provide a bit of a safe space for our LGBTQ plus employees to come together to talk about being gay at work, or being lesbian at work, or being bi at work, what that means, the issues that we face in talking to clients or collaborators. I think one of the things we all face as queer people is that really need to come out again and consider, where the people that we meet at work, or our clients, or the people that we work with on projects, can we be open with them about who we are and how we live our lives and our relationships. And you don't come out once in life, you come out again and again. And I think one of the things we've tried to promote within our team is really kind of that recognition and allowing people to bring their full selves to work. It's just an incredibly important driver of what we're doing in our team. So we do a lot of things. We do sort of fun events and activities. We do educational stuff and sort of learning at work type activities. We connect in with similar diversity and inclusion groups across other sectors and other companies and other parts of government. And really, we're just kind of trying to promote that inclusive atmosphere at work. And it has been just a real pleasure and privilege, I think, to be part of the team at Frontier that set that up and has really helped to promote that in the last few years. And I think really kind of driven a culture shift at Frontier from not really it being talked about at all when I joined to it now being a much more open thing. We're in the midst of our Pride Month celebrations. We've been doing a lot of sort of marking of Pride during June. And really just being very open and visible at work, which I think has just been hugely important and a huge motivation for me outside of the day job at work. So yeah, I think that's all I kind of want to say. Happy to take questions and also talk a little bit more about my work if people are interested. But
yeah, well, Andrew, thank you for that. And maybe just talk more about acceptance, because I think a lot of people would think in the real world, okay, Evan's in journalism, not really economics at all. Journalism, media, that's obviously very liberal, progressive, kind of up there. Universities probably fairly similar, bastions of liberal thought. Private sector, money making, bound to be more conservative, much harder to be open and to be yourself. You have to fit in. You might well have to wear a suit and tie when you go to work. You know, it's all about kind of conforming. Just talk us through whether that was your experience when you switched from the youthful IFS over to frontier economics.
I think it was a little bit of my experience. Yeah, I think when I joined Frontier, as I said, it wasn't. It was. I remember quite vividly. So IFS, when I left at the time, probably had about 40 full-time employees. There were 3 or 4 of us who were quite open about our sexuality, and it was all very sort of, you know, we discussed it quite a lot. I moved to Frontier, which at the time was maybe 150 to 200 people, and there wasn't a single openly gay person at Frontier. So it was a bit of an odd culture shift for me to kind of join a much bigger organization, but one where it was somehow different for me to talk about my sexuality. And I remember, you know, having a conversation with my director at the time and saying that I was going out for dinner that night with my boyfriend, or my then boyfriend, and it was, he sort of visibly was always taken aback that I had mentioned it. It was like nobody's ever sort of talked about it in that way before. And I think for me, that was a very sort of sobering experience, because I'd come out fairly late in life, in my sort of, you know, early to mid 20s. So having moved to Frontier in my kind of early 30s, it was my first experience of like, oh, I'm in an environment where, you know, maybe I can't be as open about this as I have been. So there was a big driver, I think, of why we wanted to set up the Spectrum team, because I'd been out for about 10 years. I was kind of quite comfortable in my skin. So being a bit of a trailblazer, if that's the right word for it, and being sort of somebody who was quite open to talk about it, was fine for me in my early 30s. But I kept thinking, what if I had just joined this organization straight out of university when I wasn't very comfortable with my sexuality? How would I have felt being in an environment where nobody was really talking about gender or sexuality? Or
it wasn't that it was a homophobic institution.
No.
It was just, yeah.
It was just not talked about. It just wasn't visible. And I think that was a really big part of why we set up Spectrum, to sort of say, well, you know, we're here, and you know, we want to be able to talk about our lives and our families and what we're doing in the same way that everyone else does, without really that thought. So that's been a big driver for us.
My own coming out experience at work was first at the IFS. I had 2 stints at the IFS. My second one was at the IFS when there was a very out economist there called Ed Whitehouse, who escaped the IFS to go to the OECD. And Ed was so out, and everyone so loved Ed. It was very easy to be out. I remember there were things like staff parties at Sadie Maisie, which I don't know, and you're all too young to remember Sadie Maisie, a rather wretched club in Farringdon at the time. It was just sort of extraordinarily, it was so welcoming. It was, there aren't many places you would go from there where you would feel quite as at home. Andrew, thank you for that. Right, we're going to get a third perspective now from someone perhaps a little younger than me, will definitely not have been around for Sadie Maisie, Abigail Wallace, who's an undergraduate studying PPE. Abigail, so much of what is changing in the world is being driven by the under 30s. I'm just fascinated in your own take. Tell us your experience.
Thanks. Yeah, so I've just finished my first year studying PPE, and I guess I'll just take you through kind of my journey with economics. Kind of a little bit like you, Evan. I started being interested in it because I was interested in the news. At break times, I like to read the newspaper, and I'm from Scotland, so when I was about 13 when the Scottish independence referendum happened, and I think that was the first time that I really started to think about, I guess, economics being a major part of my life and people's decision making. And that kind of sparked it from there. I did economics A-level, and then decided to apply to do, PP at university. I guess part of that was a little bit of fear to do just pure economics because I was so interested in all the other stuff. And then the other part of that I think was just that I think doing, I think all good economists think beyond, I guess the very narrow idea of what most people think about economics, and it's much wider than that. So that was what I was really interested in. For the past 2 years as well, I've been working with the Bank of England Youth Forum, which is a project set up with the Bank of England and the British Youth Council. So we just work to try and bring awareness about the Bank of England to young people. We want young people to see it as a place that they could go to, that they understand as well. And yeah, to kind of break some of those stereotypes, I guess, that often come up, or at least we've seen have come up. And that's been really cool. We've got opportunities to meet lots and lots of awesome people and do things such as this. For me, my identity in the LGBTQ community and economics doesn't necessarily overlap, other than the fact that I've just found throughout school that I've always gravitated towards, I guess, groups of other LGBTQ plus students, whether we knew it or not. And I guess our interests intersect. But for me, I think as a young person looking at how maybe, I guess, interest in economics or LGBTQ plus young people connecting with each other, the internet has made it so much easier to learn more about both of those things. And so I guess maybe you might find, maybe in a totally unrelated way, but you maybe more economists in the future because it's more open and it's easier to find that information. Certainly there's more ways to find role models through events like this, or just Google or anything like that. And that's the same, I think, with young queer people as well. So much easier for us to connect with others and to see people like us. And I think that's definitely been a part of my journey. And I think maybe that's something that's quite specific to, I guess, Gen Z, that information overload, that ability to connect with people. But I think that's great. I think it means that there's a lot more awareness about issues, and there's a lot more awareness about what's right in communities or aspirational things. So yeah, that's pretty much my journey with economics, and I'm don't really have a specialty or anything like that yet, but I'm enjoying kind of learning.
Abigail, thank you, Abigail. But you haven't told us what your career plans are. What do you want to be in 10 years' time?
Well, I maybe purposely dodged that question. I'm not entirely sure. I think I definitely want to have, I guess, in a loose sense, economics be part of my career. But I'm really not sure what I want to do. I think for me, in the next few years at university, I want to find out a bit more about what I'm most interested in the field, and then see how it goes. But it's definitely something I want to keep with, and from everything I've seen, it's an amazing community of people who are really talented.
Definitely the right thing to keep your options open. You don't have to decide yet. I am interested though in whether, so when I went to university, we were also closeted. I was absolutely closeted when I did PPE. We're also closeted. You wouldn't have been able to say, oh, the gays, they're all doing that, or the LGBT people are all doing this. You wouldn't have been able to see any patterns anywhere because you wouldn't have known who was who. But I am interested in whether you see, are LGBTQ plus people more overrepresented in PPE? Do they tend to pick the E, or do they pick the P, or first P or the second P? I mean, do you spot any patterns at all? Are there fewer LGBTQ plus engineers? I mean, I'm just sort of fascinated. We'll come back and we'll maybe get Ian to comment on this afterwards, but I do think I am interested in whether there are clusters or career directions that correlate.
I mean, from my experience, I think, again, I guess it's about the kind of degree of openness that people have. When you actually get to kind of talking with people, I'm not sure there's a huge difference between subjects. You find, LGBTQ plus people everywhere if you look hard enough. But I guess at university, it's definitely more of a kind of, I guess, more of the humanities subjects maybe get more of an environment or opportunity to express their identity. And so I would definitely say that the students that I've seen who are most vocal about their identity come from those subjects. But I don't know if that, I'm not sure that's necessarily because economics is homophobic or transphobic or anything like that. I think, I think it's just maybe, in academics, they get to explore
There are two
that.
characteristics, there's the vocal and there's the, and so you might have certain.
Exactly.
Are you left-handed, Abigail?
I am, yes.
Yeah, so am I. And there's apparently a correlation between LGBTQ plus and left-handed. I don't know whether it's just in men, women, or whatever, but well, maybe Ian's done the stats on that as well. Fascinating. Abigail, thank you for that. Okay, let's have a last mini talk. Remember, you can pop your questions if you have any for those watching live. You can pop your questions in the Q&A chat box. I've got a couple in there. And we'll take some of those after. But let's have our last talk from Carol Proper. And Carol is someone who's risen to the heights of the profession, no less than president at one point of the Royal Economic Society, professor of economics at Imperial College Business School. Carol, why don't you talk us through a little about your career?
Thanks. I mean, my career, I think, is a bit different because partly just my age and partly I never wanted to be an academic. I'm the child of two immigrants into Britain, and I think I'd always kind of stood back a bit from things in some ways. And so I did economics at university. I hadn't done it at school. I'd done maths and geography and French. And I did economics at university, and then after finishing my degree, I vowed never, ever to be an economist again, and actually went to do which was my passion, which is I've been very involved in community politics when I was an undergraduate at Bristol, and continued that and became a community worker in North London, in Islington, and in fact built and ran adventure playgrounds and things like that. And then after a while, I was very involved in community product, and I was out by then, and very much kind of it was very much part of my identity. And then decided to go back to university and study stats and social policy. And that was at Oxford. And then after that, I kind of decided that actually I really liked the discipline of economics. I liked the social policy. I always felt was a bit kind of woolly. It sounds very strange. And so I actually did a PhD in economics, going to North America, studying kind of through comps and the kind of North American system, and then came back to Britain. But I think I combined my interest in kind of social justice and my own politics around the topic that I chose to kind of study in, which is basically I'm an economist who specializes in healthcare. And it seemed to me that in healthcare, the great thing about healthcare, it's like 10% of the economy, 15% of the economy in some countries. And it kind of combines everything. It's got issues around equity, it's got issues around competition policy, it's got issues around procurement, more or less anything. It's got big issues around the economics of contracting. It seems to me more or less anything you think about in terms of economics disciplines and then think about economics tools, even macroeconomics. I've just, there's interest in the relationship between macroeconomic cycles and health. And health seems to combine them all. I guess I came to it with a kind of social justice, kind of Tony Atkinson interest in inequality and inequality in health. And a lot of my early work was about inequality in health. My later work has been about whether you can think about applying market discipline to organizations deep within the public sector to try and improve productivity and to try and improve the quality and availability of public services. So I guess, in terms of my sort of interest, the kind of health area of health economics comprises my own sort of personal interests in social justice and other things. Now, I think actually as an economist, there are more areas where you might work in those fields. But when I sort of started, it was kind of health or education. There was a sort of issue about this in that I think everybody thought they were sort of soft subjects that only women did. And I do remember meeting a man who will be nameless, who's quite a well-known economist, who took one. He'd never met me. I was the only economist in the department I worked in for many years, the only female economist. And he kind of met me and said, "Oh, you must do development." And I said, "No." He said, "You're a woman, you must do development." So I think it's great that actually economics has really changed like that. And there's some fantastic female macroeconomists like Ellen Ray and other people who are just fantastic role models as well, and spend a lot of time supporting particularly women in economics. So that I think is my journey. The other thing I was going to say is that I do think being an outside, thinking about yourself as an outsider, which I think you do as a queer person, for some of your life anyway, is actually a useful trait as an academic, because it means you sort of stand back from things, you analyze things. It relates to something you were saying, Evan, earlier to kind of Ian, how can you be dispassionate? Well, actually, as an academic, you have to be. And kind of, I think, almost as a queer person, you have to be, because the rest of society, half the time, doesn't think you exist. Well, fine, you don't, maybe to them, but you do to you. And that gives you a kind of perspective to kind of step back and say, well, you know, if I didn't exist, or rather, if this model didn't, if this thing I'm trying to prove in this model doesn't exist, how do I go about showing it exists? I think that's a kind of subtle link, but I think for me, it's an important link.
Thank you, Carol. And that is very interesting. And that issue of outsider status, which I do think is very, very core to a lot of the experiences of LGBTQ people. I mean, potentially not so much, and potentially not for the whole of their lives, but there's certainly, I think, a phase in many of our lives that's been very, very present. I guess I'm interested. I don't want to engage in kind of rivalry of different ways of identifying, but let's be blunt. Do you think being a woman was more of a disadvantage in economics, or being LGBTQ plus woman was more of a disadvantage? Because in many ways, maybe you just fuse the two, the identity together.
I mean, for me, obviously, they were a fused identity. I was kind of out by the time I was 21. I've been in economics a lot longer than that. So, but no, it's being female for me, because and the thing is that it's like color, it's like race. You can't hide that, and you can hide your gay identity if you wish to. And I knew a lot of people who did. I mean, I know loads of people who, when I was sort of active, Margaret Thatcher had clause 28, which meant that a whole load of people who were teachers simply ran back into the closet because they would have been, you know, very penalized. So I think that obviously being female, and also for a lot of, I was the only female in my department. I was the only, everybody else's wives didn't work. It was amazing. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. I hadn't come from that environment. I'd come from a kind of community activist environment where women worked just like men. So for a long time, I was the only female. I was certainly I was one of 5 only female professors in Britain for a long time. And along with Denise Osborne, we set up the Women's Committee at the RES. And I think we were the only 2 or 3 who were actually in Russell Group universities. And for a long, even when I was at Imperial, I was the only, I mean, I went to Imperial 11 years ago to the business school. I've been the only female professor until the last 2 years. So I think obviously my identity as a woman is kind of very clear in economics. And I think, yeah, and it was very much, you know, when I started in it, I'm so pleased it isn't like that. And I've fought all my life for it not to be like this. You know, it was all men standing at the bar, and I'm a rather, for those of you who know me, I'm not very tall. I'm only 1.55 meters. So standing at the bar is really shit for me. I have to kind of crane my neck or basically look at people's tummies. So, you know, yeah, no, it was definitely being female and not being gay. I mean, not. It wasn't a gay.
That was the more visible different
That's
or
just,
distinct.
it was just visible. What I did
Yeah.
about being gay was, in a sense, my choice. What I did about being a woman was no choice about it.
I want to open it up a little bit, and we've got some questions coming in, so I do want to take some questions. Ian, can you help us? Just, I don't know whether you know statistically, what are the professions that queer people gravitate towards disproportionately? What do they avoid gravitating themselves towards? And what are the what about economics? Do you have any data on the profession of economics?
I actually put a paper on this. So I have a paper on degree choices of gays and lesbians and why do they pick the degrees they want. And the common theme that you find with gays, LGBT individuals, is that they value careers with autonomy. Because if you get to kind of control your work environment, it really helps you avoid discrimination. So they really gravitate towards these occupations where they may have a manager, but in terms of their ability to structure their day, structure their work, and decide how to sort of do their job, their bosses are a lot more, sort of removed from that process. So that, desire for autonomy causes gays and lesbians to definitely cluster in various academic disciplines. And so what you'll find is that for gays and lesbians, they still have very gendered patterns of where they cluster. So gay men are much more likely to be in STEM than lesbian women, but again, both of them much less common than heterosexuals. So they avoid STEM and business. Any places where you have high levels of prejudice, they typically do avoid. So you have a large overrepresentation in arts and humanities and social sciences. So fortunately for economics, because economics is a social science in many, many universities, you do actually have quite a bit of LGBT people studying economics. But arts and humanities is the one that really stands out, especially for trans individuals. It's quite surprising when you see how many trans people are in arts and humanities relative to the other fields. It's what's cool though is amongst the trans community, you don't have these gender differences. So trans men and trans women have very similar degree choices. So it's almost completely identical between them. So they don't seem to be using their gender or having the same reaction to sort of STEM or not STEM that you have amongst even queer men and women. And so that was actually really cool to see. But I will say the one occupation that is the highest concentration of gays and lesbians is actually professors. So in the US, about 13% of people working in tertiary education are gay or lesbian, which is about 5 times the size of the population, which is about, because it's about 2 to 5% depending on what you're measuring. And so about 13 to 15% of people in tertiary education are gay or lesbian.
And Ian,
so,
can you confirm
that autonomy? Yeah, the academic careers are very autonomous. You have a lot of control. And what do you do with an arts and humanities degree half the time? But yeah, so that was actually fun to see.
Ian, am I right about the left-handed thing? I'm sure I've read the left-handed correlation. Does that stand up at all? Have you come across that?
The hands, not really. It's there, but it's not very strong. Because you also have the ratio between your index and your ring finger. The ratio of those 2 fingers also is correlated with sort of sexual identity, and it's all to do with the androgens in the womb and epigenetic factors. But correlation or causation, it's very hard to tell.
Yeah. It's too much. We've only got another 15 minutes. This question is essentially, in my 7 years being an LGBTQ+ economics student and economist, this is the first I've seen the community mentioned in the discipline. So thank you. My question is what issues do the panel think are unique to LGBTQ+ people? And do we need more LGBTQ+ economists in the profession to help solve them? So I think I should give this one to Carol and Andrew. I think not to Ian, specifically not to Ian, because he's the expert on this. So Carol and Andrew, are there issues that are unique to LGBTQ+ people? What are the issues? And does it take LGBTQ+ economists to study them? Andrew, do you want to have a go at that?
Happy to have a go. I'm not sure that I can think of anything that I would say is sort of unique to LGBTQ+ people. because I think we are also a diverse group, and you know, we have a sort of huge amount of variation in our experiences and our lives and our upbringing and all of those things that sort of shape our identity above and beyond our sexual orientation. I think that the point I raised earlier around, I guess, something that Carol mentioned as well, you can, if you want to, sort of suppress openly your sexual orientation. And so one of the things that I think we might face compared to people in terms of gender or in terms of their ethnic background, you can not be open about it. And if you do want to be open about it, you have to kind of make those conscious choices all the time about, am I in a safe environment to be open, to say openly that I am dating a man, and to talk about my boyfriend as opposed to my girlfriend or my wife, and is this a conversation that I can have? And so for me, that's something that we face, and that is a perspective of life that perhaps isn't something that most people have to worry about. Can I hold my partner's hand walking down the street? Am I in an environment where that is safe? So I think, you know, there may be there's a lot of economists sort of infiltrate all aspects of public policy and public life and research. Maybe, you know, there's something we can bring to analysis of health policy or crime or justice that are about some of the issues that we might face as a community, and you know, certainly things like the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, the implications of that. There are lots of things that sort of affected, you know, LGBT people as a group, where I think we have an important perspective. But in terms of what are there sort of issues that gay economists should be sort of focused on, I'm not so sure I can think of anything off the top of my head, but I think it's important that there is diversity, because we do bring a perspective, we have a view, we have a unique experience in some ways, and I think that needs to be in economics as it needs to be in other disciplines.
Yeah, Carol, I'm most of the conventional areas of economics, you know, the prisoner's dilemma would be a great thing to think about. The consumption function. I mean, most of these are just not going to be sort of economics at undergraduate level, are not going to have, I would imagine, a particular application to the LGBTQ plus community. But you can think of economists who've done rather interesting, sophisticated studies on, I don't know, when economists really go and plant their tanks on other people's lawns about the dating market and these kinds of things, you get into some very fun games, and you definitely want some LGBTQ plus people in the room when you're doing that. But Carol, do you have any good ideas?
I mean, no, I think I'm very much with kind of Andrew with this, that in a sense, there isn't a particular kind of perspective, and we're all different, and we kind of, the point we can do is that we can spend more or less of our lives in the closet, but that's sort of orthogonal in some ways to what might interest you in economics. I mean, and clearly I think the other trend that I see in economics, which I think probably would attract from the kind of thing that Ian's saying would attract people to economics, is the fact that we keep plonking ourselves in other people's lawns. We're definitely in the environment lawn, and we should be, because who else knows about carbon taxing and incentives. We're definitely in sociologists' lawns. They may not like us for it, and we may do it badly. We're in psychologists' lawns. We spend a lot of time thinking about well-being. And we're in machine learning. I mean, we're in many AI lawns as well. So I think economists have a desire to colonize the world, and many. But I don't think that's a particularly queer perspective to colonize the world. I think it's kind of, you know, it's the discipline. It's such an exciting discipline, and you can apply it to so many things. Sometimes badly, and sometimes well, but I think that's kind of, for me at least, that's orthogonal to kind of an identity around one's sexuality, personal preferences, and other things.
I have that feeling. I have that feeling too. Now I've got one here from Nuria Lopez. I'm going to put this to you, Abigail, because you might say, I don't know, but I'm interested. This one is, what policies are most effective for safeguarding and promoting inclusion for the LGBTQIA plus community in schools and the workplace? Now, I'm interested in your perspective on this, Abigail, of how you promote inclusion, because I, in a funny sort of way, don't think my generation have anything to teach your generation about this, because you're just so much more advanced than, well, more than we were at that age, and probably more advanced than we are at our age. So anything you want to add on promoting inclusion, particularly in schools and colleges, Abigail, if you want to unmute?
Yeah, no, I think from my perspective, even when I was at school, I saw the attitudes change quite drastically. I think I was kind of midway through high school when I guess it started to become okay, I guess, to be openly part of that the LGBT community. And I think now in a lot of places, not everywhere, but in the best of places, it's something that people really do wear with pride. I think the best strategy that I've seen is when whoever is running a school or community really take the time to set up support networks for their students, and also take the time to kind of promote people and stories and ideas from that community. I mean, I think it's just awareness. It's seeing someone like yourself. And also, I mean, I think in the media, the more that you see someone different from you, the more accepting you are, the more you understand their life. And it's the same in schools and communities. You bring LGBTQ students to speak, you ask them to have clubs, you know, all that kind of stuff. I think it's really very much about kind of changing it from being a secret thing to something that you should be really open and happy about. And I mean, I guess that's the meaning of pride as well. And that's what I think has been the most effective in the past 10 years to kind of change us from where we were, I guess, in 2010 to now. It's just incredible.
I mean, what you've said is really interesting. And I guess a fear I have, and this is even a fear with a fear of a very inspiring event like this, is that in my dream world, people become quite casual about it. Now, Andrew actually said this. He said to his boss, "Oh, I went out with my boyfriend," or so. I think I can't remember what exactly you said, Andrew, but you came out to your boss in a very casual, drop it in kind of way. And I think my most successful kind of coming out experiences have been when I have not been all heavy about it and have not been, now everybody sit down, I've got something important to tell you. I have been through those experiences, but I much prefer the kind of, "Oh, what did you do last night?" "Oh, I went to that film with my boyfriend." And then everybody kind of just clocks a little, sort of registers what has just been said, and then takes their cue from the sheer casualness of it. And the slight worry I have, well, what I admire about your generation, Abigail, is my feeling that you are just much more casual about it. And is there a fear that we kind of make it out like it's a mental health condition and we need sort of therapy and support because we're all so traumatized by being part of the LGBTQ plus community? I just wonder whether keeping it absolutely kind of, keeping it casual is the way to go, not getting too kind of, I don't know, too stressed about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the goal, you know, in long term, but I think we're still, unfortunately, so far away from that. I do think that for a lot of people it is more or less casual now, but there's definitely other parts of the community, specifically trans kids, really struggling right now. And I think maybe it will take, you know, years longer, so that all of us, part of the LGBT community, can feel that it's casual before we can really stop being so, I guess, vocal about it all the time. But I do think that, yeah, I think that my generation definitely are more casual, but I think we also celebrate pride and
right. No, well, there's celebrating is, yeah, no, they're mixing up. I was mixing up different things there. Okay, look, we are actually at the end of our time, and the timetable says Evan wraps up event. Well, I've spoken quite enough, and gives each speaker a minute to give a final message to young LGBTQI plus people, and hopefully encourage them to come in the grand subject, the great subject of economics. So let's go through the panel in the same order we did at the very beginning. You have a sort of a wind-up minute each. And if you want to address the question I started with, how strongly you feel the connection between your membership of the LGBTQI plus community and your interest in economics, whether that is orthogonal or whether that is deeply connected. You could maybe comment on that too. So we'll take Ian, but this is quick one, Ian, just a minute each. Ian first.
Yep. So I think for me, my identity inspires my research. I think that's what gets me excited to do research every morning, is the ability to study the LGBT community. But I think my words of encouragement are kind of what Carol said, that like economics is whatever you want it to be. All you have to do is say the economics of, and the toolkit that you have as an economist allows you to understand any social phenomenon. As long as there's a some sort of level of scarcity and we need to allocate a resource, you can bring that toolkit to what you want to study. So economics, I don't think of it as studying businesses or studying production. It's really a way of studying the world and using this mathematical formula for model-driven toolkit to understand, be it the news, history, anything you want, really. And so it's more I like to say use economics as a toolkit to study what you love. And I think the economics discipline is wide enough that you will find people interested in what you're interested in.
Brilliant. I couldn't put it better myself in that. Andrew, do you want to offer a bit of inspiration to young people thinking about the subject?
I'll do my best. I mean, I think what I would say to sort of LGBTQ plus young people, do I want to study economics, is almost, I think I would say the same thing to anybody about, why you might want to study economics. It opens a lot of doors. We actually did a piece of work at Frontier for Discover Economics last year, we analysed data from sort of tens of thousands of online job advertisements, and we were looking at who was hiring economists, who was demanding the skills that an economics degree can give you. And what we found was it's not just banks and finance people. It's everyone. It's across the economy. The biggest hirer of economists is the NHS. Economists are in huge demand from tech companies. They're in huge demand from all parts of the professional services industry and obviously in academia as well. So, an economics degree opens up just a lot of pathways for you. And if you're interested in applying those skills, whether they're sort of data skills or just sort of being curious about, what it is that drives people's behavior, then there's a lot of opportunities that's opened up by economics. I think there is something I really wholeheartedly agree with what Ian said. You can apply that. If you're really driven by your identity, and you can bring that to economics. And I think we are increasingly getting the data and the toolkits to allow us to do that analysis. And I think that's a really interesting, unexplored and relatively unexplored area for economics to tap into the future. And I'm looking forward to that being cracked open by the next generation. But I'd say, yeah, it opens up a lot of doors and gives you a lot of skills that I think can be applied to your passion, wherever that might be.
Abigail, give us your last minute thought.
Yeah, I would echo what Ian and Andrew said as well. But I guess from the perspective of a student, so much of what we talk about and with economics and I guess with gender issues, LGBT issues, look in the past, 30, 40 years, and it's so important to learn from that. But I think it's also important to tell young people that the rate of change is so quick right now, and the experiences that you're having will be different from even my experience. And I think the path that we were on is a good one. And I just ask people to keep looking out for their trans friends, trans and non-binary friends, and keep fighting for them in the same way that we have for our lesbian, gay, bisexual friends.
Thank you, Abigail. And then finally, Carol, you get the last word here.
I think my last word is simply to echo everything that everyone else has said. Economics is a great thing to do. It's a great thing for the world as well as for you. And I just encourage anyone to do it. And I'd encourage anyone from any other disciplines to kind of do a master's in economics, even if you didn't in the first place, or do a PhD in economics. I'm a real imperialist. Come do economics.
Thank you, Carol. Well, I have to say, I would advise people to do economics, actually not to become an economist. I mean, I kind of was an economist in my early days. I wouldn't call myself an economist now, but I think it is a toolkit, as Ian said, and it's one in tools of clear thinking. And I think it helps in many, many walks of life, whether you're applying it professionally or whether you're an engineer or you're if you're a manager, all sorts of civil servant, it's a really useful thing to have. And talking of clear thinking, we've had a lovely, beautifully clear thinking panel, all extremely articulate and eloquent, just talking through some of the issues, and who've made this such a good event. And really, it is the fact of the event that is the important thing about tonight, as much as all the individual thoughts we've had. It is just the start of a conversation, really, about diversity in economics involving LGBTQ+ communities and economics and how it connects to them. So I've certainly had a great time. Thanks to our panel, Ian Byrne, Andrew Leicester, Carol Proper, and Abigail Wallace too. Thank you so much, Abigail, for joining us. And thanks for your questions. We got through a few of them, and I hope you've all had a good evening as well. Thank you so much. Thank you.